Hey guys, welcome back to Economics and Comics. This is going to be a movie review on Red Joan based on a true story, so we'll get into it a little bit. I'm here with Mike and Joel Massey from GoneWithTheTwins.com.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. Please sub if you guys enjoy this type of stuff, and please check them out at GoneWithTheTwins.com. They have tons of movie reviews on all types of stuff. They're great. They're the best. So, what'd you guys think about Red Joan?
I thought it's a fascinating story. And we'll get into how they kind of destroy expectations later in the movie. But it's basically based around this woman named Joan Stanley, who was essentially a Russian spy back when they were Britain and Canada were attempting to create the atomic bomb during World War II. And it wasn't until she was in her 90s that she was discovered to have been the Russian spy who leaked the information to them about, to help them build their own atomic bombs. So it's a really interesting story, but this movie is not really true to what actually happened. There's a lot of factual, things.
Yeah, it opens like a lot of movies
yeah.
with the phrase "inspired by a true story." But I think this film, more than almost any other, is genuinely using that term accurately. Because this is not a factual story. This is merely an inspiration, designed around.
It's almost a fictional story where they just took one basic concept of the granny spy.
Granny spy.
And the granny spy is the real character who was discovered in her 90s to be a Russian spy. But so this movie almost completely makes up everything that she's doing during the war.
They've taken this character,
deceptive, I think,
but not her actual involvement, her events, her name, her relatives.
So the actual race to build the atomic bomb is factual, but all of the things, her participation is probably very fictionalized.
So, real quick question: in the movie, it's a love story, drama, kind of very small spy. A spy, but they kind of portray her as someone that's giving away the information to Russia. To stop all the war if everyone has the bomb. So you saying that none of that's true, that most likely she was just a Russian spy, period, and it was just to get the information, not to stop the war?
Well, so one of the interesting things is that, at the end of the movie, they do a press conference, which is based on the real event, and she comes out and says, I'm not a traitor, I love my country. I only released these details to the Russians so that they would have an atomic bomb, and her idea was if everybody has an atomic bomb, nobody uses them, the world becomes at peace. And she's not wrong in that the world was at peace essentially there was no atomic bombs dropped between World War II and present day. However, she actually the real person didn't make a speech like that. So it's almost like it's just maybe the director's idea.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of
their fantasy of how it could go. Yeah.
Even so much so as she has a son in the film who at first expresses the opinions that a lot of British people would have, which is just this utter betrayal, and he doesn't even want to look at her anymore. But then by the end, there's this Hollywood kind of reconciliation.
I'll defend you, Mom.
Yeah, and it's a little bit a little bit much.
Perhaps the most feeling of betrayal is that the real person's name wasn't even Joan.
Oh yeah,
and so that this press conference at the end where they're the news reporters are like Red Joan, string her up or whatever, but that's not even a thing. Her name wasn't Joan, so that phrase wasn't a real thing.
They're starting to abuse that a lot more. With my time with these guys, and I'm relatively new at working with these guys. I've been doing it for a long time. We've been seeing a lot of things that are saying based on true events, based on true stories, and honestly, it's only one bit of information, which is I don't think they should be able to say that anymore.
It's very misleading. Is what it is.
Very misleading.
Joel and I were joking about Inglourious Bastards in comparison to this, in which they grotesquely twist reality and history for the sake of entertainment. But that film doesn't claim to be based on what they're doing is taking most people's preconceptions about what happened in World War II and Hitler and things like that. But this film plays it off right from the beginning frame as if this is all real. Yeah. So which is. As you're watching the film, it grows steadily more disappointing when you realize the things that they have fabricated.
The movie itself is fairly interesting, and it's acting very well acted, very competently directed. One of the things that I think spoils it a lot for me is the way the story is told. It's done in flashbacks.
Yeah.
So the movie starts with the main, Joan Stanley, who's played by Dame Judi Dench, as an old lady in her 90s. And she is approached and said, by the British government saying, oh, you're under arrest for being a spy. But so the rest of the movie is basically told in sequential flashbacks back to the war and how she's aiding the Russians. But the way that's done, it immediately removes all of the suspense, the espionage, the spy, like what could have been maybe a spy thriller, just becomes a drama.
There's
because
no
she doesn't die,
right.
She doesn't get caught. There's just so many things that it removes all that layer of suspense.
Yeah, I'll go a step further, and Bill, you tell me if you agree with this, but this is predominantly a character study, and I found Judi Dench, her entire role, to be unnecessary. Yeah. If this is told straightforward, we could have watched Sophie Cookson, who plays the young version of Joan. I could have watched the whole movie with her. And only at the end, we could have just had a coda flash on screen that says, this is what happened after the course of the war, and she got discovered. I didn't need to see Judi Dench at all. Not to say that Judi Dench wasn't she's a phenomenal actress, and, she did a good job in this role. I don't think she was necessary in this film.
I agree. From my point of perspective, I don't think that she was needed, but maybe they were needed so they could push the movie.
Well, she's the name,
the biggest
right?
star.
She's a great actress.
But I thought Sophie Cookson was far more
she was quite engaging.
Yeah, she was good.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not the type that watches a lot of movies like this. I mean, honestly, I do, but not to this, so it was refreshing for me to look at this, but, all the ideas that they were saying in the movie and everything, and I'm agreeing with everything else you said, just didn't seem real. Like they were adding a lot of extra stuff in there.
Well, all of the romances and all of that stuff is probably complete fiction.
I mean, it makes it kind of entertaining.
Oh yeah,
if you're taking your wife to a movie and it's a love story, multiple love stories. I kind of think.
Well, you've got two timelines going on, and they keep cross-cutting back and forth between them, and it's a strange. To me, it's an ineffective storytelling structure. The narrative did not need to.
If they hadn't started with Judi Dench's, as the older Joan, you would not. You could watch it without knowing if she was going to.
Well, I gave it away instantly.
Yeah.
And also, there's a couple other parts in there, not to dig too deep, but eventually they blame someone else, one of her coworkers that she's in love with, and she makes a deal. Probably none of this is real. I don't know, but might be. And she says, I'll give up all this information and we'll get him out of jail and we'll run to Australia or something like that. But did they ever give information? If she gave information, I mean, did she give information?
Yeah, the real spy did in fact give a lot of, and she was considered by the Russians
identity.
She was considered to be a major asset by the Russians, and
in the film, the Russians were nowhere near to building their own atomic bomb. So it was without her help, they would have never.
Not necessarily never, but
it would
years
take,
behind. They were years behind, and she boosted them to the level of being able to acquire the hydrogen bomb so much faster. So
one of the elements I did like was the kind of the aspect of no one suspects a woman, and I felt like that was an interesting way of showing this. That the reason she was so successful as a spy is that nobody took her seriously. All of the scientists, when they get in a room, she had degrees and. She was actually probably one of the smarter people in the room, but everybody just dismissed her.
Yeah, she makes a comment that she's invisible in a man's world.
Very what I thought was interesting about that too, and not in a negative way, but do you think that's kind of the concept behind the military, not really favoring women in the military because they might perceive them as too emotional to handle the job?
One of the things
is that a crazy question?
One of the things I didn't like is that several moments throughout the film, I mean, she is a strong female character, but there are many moments where they almost basically say, oh, she's too emotional, that's why she's so easily manipulated. I felt like, they shouldn't do that. I mean, perhaps in real life she was manipulated, but,
she had to be incredibly tough to deal with doing this role.
Because at many moments she is almost caught, but then a lot of the times they almost catch her and they're like, oh, but she's a woman, she couldn't be the one behind it.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to say anything negative, towards women or anything like that. I just kind of relate that to all the issues that's been around, and
Yeah. Well, I was, she is a strong female character, and so I was a little disappointed when they do things to take that away from her.
Yeah.
Even though she is the villain essentially.
But it is the timing too.
Yeah.
The time period.
So my final thoughts for this is I think if anything, this will inspire people to read up about the actual events.
Yeah.
So maybe it'll inspire. So the shame is that while this could have served as a bit of education, it actually just serves as fictionalized entertainment.
Yeah.
Which is that's the disappointing part. But at the same time, I hope people look up the actual events and are inspired to learn.
Well, it's an interesting slice of history that perhaps a lot of U.S. audiences know nothing about, is the race that other countries had to do to try and get their own atomic bombs. So.
I agree.
So Bill's score?
I agree. I think it'll draw interest to the whole story. And I thought it was an interesting movie. I don't know. I guess a 6 out of 10 or something. 5 out of 10. Not for me, but it's interesting. And the acting was great. And if you want to see their score, go over to GoneWithTheTwins.com. And thanks again so much, guys.
Don't forget to subscribe to this channel.
Yeah, we got another review coming out soon, a big one. We'll see you there. Bye.